Paradise Valley. I probably know your kids' names and seen them on papers and maybe talked to you over the phone. And hopefully you've joined in some of our other meetings. I wanted to let you know our next one is February 13th. And that is where I am presenting on different options for gifted services in Paradise Valley. So regardless, and I'm talking pre-K through high school. So start thinking about for next year. If you're wondering what your options are, please join us for that night. And now we will start with David Graham, who is, I forgot to mention, the amazing teacher at the Digital Learning Center, which he actually helped create and design and redefine it. So we do some parent nights for the DLC. There's still a few spaces open for next year. And maybe after his presentation, if you have questions about that program, please feel free to ask him. Thank you. Enjoy.
I just want to jump in one more time. It wasn't actually on, the live stream was not. I wanted to remind you all to go to our Facebook page and check out what future events are coming. As Dina said, we're on February 13th. We are going to have an overview of all of the programs, the gifted programs in PV. And this has come from all of you. It's been a while since we did all of them at once, and so we're really looking forward to that. And I wanted to also let you know we have another event coming up that is in March, and the date is still to be determined, but the subject is more geared towards secondary or high school students, maybe a little bit middle school, and it's basically about dropout and preventing dropout of gifted kids. So we're really excited about that. We don't do a lot of programs with middle school and high school that are focused on social emotional. So that one, be looking at the Facebook page, because more information is going to be coming on that, and we'd love to have good attendance. The person that's presenting is an outside presenter from Europe, and we're very excited. Dina came across this person, and I'm just so excited that she was able to encourage them to come out and speak to our school district. Thank you.
So, I hope everyone's doing well tonight. I'm very excited to share this presentation with you. This presentation has actually been kind of bubbling in my head for a few years now. Like Dr. Berea said, I've been in the Paradise Valley District since I was in kindergarten all the way up through high school. I student taught here at Echo Mountain Primary and Intermediate in special ed and a gifted cluster classroom. My first job was over at Shea Middle School, and I currently teach at Sunrise Middle School, and I've been there the last 7 years in the DLC. And pretty much all of my professional career has been in middle school. And when I started my first principal at Shea Middle School, he told me something that I thought was really interesting. He said, middle school is the type of grade that basically you'll know within about 3 years if it's for you. In about 3 years, you're either going to go down to elementary or you're going to go up to high school. And then he said, but if you make it through those 3 years, you'll be there for life. And here I am in my 8th year teaching all of it in middle school. And this is a very special age group, and it's often misunderstood. And especially when we look at gifted education, it's an age group that is kind of in this weird transitionary period where many programs offer honors, offerings, and things like that, but it's a whole different world than what elementary was. So my hope is today that we can talk about some of the social and emotional needs of gifted middle schoolers and understand what we can do to best support our gifted middle schoolers. And it's all going to be wrapped around this idea of Calvin and Hobbes. In high school, I discovered this deep love of cartooning. I would doodle nonstop in my notes and everything, and I started telling more sequential art stories with them about my adventures during high school, and then that carried on into college where I cartooned for ASU's paper. And whenever you're in any sort of art form, you always have those individuals that you look up to and that you admire. And Calvin and Hobbes was really one of those big pieces for me. I looked at Calvin and Hobbes, and it really was a groundbreaking work. Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, he really came at an interesting time. In the mid-'80s, he introduced the world to Calvin and Hobbes, and in many ways, it breaks so many of the traditions that people had expected from comic strips at that time. It was pretty revolutionary. When we look at what Calvin and Hobbes was doing, we had a character who did not have a giant group of friends. We have a child that doesn't have his Peanuts gang type characters. It's Calvin and his stuffed tiger. And that's pretty much it, which for a comic strip is pretty different. We have parents that, although they love Calvin, he gets on their nerves. And they're very open to say that. And that's different than what we would normally see in the newspapers. And what's interesting about this is this character resonated with people. And really, in a lot of ways, when we see a genius like this, we need to look at the work that he creates. And although he created this comic strip that is very much revolutionized and something that people look at, I don't think he realized that he created a very great example of a gifted child. And when we look at Calvin, we don't initially think that he's gifted. And a lot of times we see him bucking traditional gifted stereotypes. He doesn't want to do his work. He doesn't like going to school. There's actually a really profound comic where his dad is talking to him and he's like, Calvin, you've read every book in the library about dinosaurs. Why do you hate school? And Calvin looks at him and says, well, we don't read about dinosaurs. And it's this really profound moment. I feel like this strip really captures Calvin pretty well. Calvin says, I'm a genius, but I'm a misunderstood genius. Hobbes asks him, what's misunderstood about you? And he says, nobody thinks I'm a genius, as he's put his shirt on incorrectly. And when we look at Calvin, Calvin really embodies this idea of giftedness, referred to as asynchronous development, which is basically the idea that intellectually our gifted students are thinking at these profound high levels, well beyond their years. But emotionally, many of them are either at their age level or below. And so there's this discrepancy, which can be a bit tricky to work with. You might be working with your kids and having these profound discussions, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're talking philosophy and all of these high concept things, and then you look over and they're spinning in circles out in the backyard, and you're like, what? And that's giftedness. And this can be very difficult once we transition into the middle school years. And we look at our gifted middle schoolers and we see them trying to fit into a very interesting time period and trying to take on new roles. When we look at Calvin, though, there's actually a moment in the comic strips that it really clicked for me that he was gifted. And it was actually in this strip, and it had to deal with doing a project. Hobbes goes up to Calvin and says, how is the diorama coming along? Calvin says, I'm almost finished. Hobbes then asks him, that didn't take too long. And Calvin says, that's because I'm a genius. Hobbes says, I don't see the road runner. Weren't you going to put one in? Calvin then responds with, see those cotton balls I glued down? Hobbes says, yeah. And Calvin says, the roadrunner just ran out of the scene, leaving the clouds of dust. This right here is such a profoundly intelligent, brilliant moment that we have a child that has thought about, how do I get out of this with the least work possible? And he used what he knew, cartoons. If you've watched Wile E. Coyote, we see the Roadrunner scurrying out of scenes, leaving clouds of dust behind him. And Calvin worked with what he knew. And so when we look at gifted students, things like this, in a traditional sense, would probably not fly over well. But fortunately, especially in the Paradise Valley School District, we have amazing gifted teachers that understand our gifted students, understand their quirks, understand that if a child's doing something like this, there's a great creativity, and are able to work and cultivate with our students. But we go through kindergarten, first, second, third, all the way through sixth grade with this great environment, and then we ask this question, what do we do when Calvin goes to middle school? And everything changes. We've gone from a single teacher classroom, a teacher that in many self-contained classrooms has a small group of students that he or she is working with. A single teacher classroom where that teacher is able to get to know that student incredibly well. That teacher can work with that student. That teacher can look at what that student has done and get the best out of them. Develops this relationship with the parents. And then we go, okay, we're in sixth grade. Here's middle school. Push. Here's now 7 teachers. Here's teachers that really have 45 to 50 minutes to get to know you. And on top of that, we have hormonal changes happening, we have social changes happening, and we have dynamics with parents that are completely different than what we have seen before. And so we're in this very interesting point where we need to look at, what do we do now? And this is incredibly important because middle school, although it's in the middle of elementary and high school, it often gets overlooked. Elementary school is where we build a foundation for setting them up for success. High school is where we're establishing their future, going to college and all of that. High school is where the grades count. The GPA is going to go towards their scholarships and all of that. Middle school kind of gets overlooked. Yet it is such a crucial time period because once we look at middle school, that is where students are really coming into their own. So what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at not only what their social and emotional needs are, but how we can best support these students. One of the things that's really interesting is once we get this transition, I often see this kind of look from parents when I meet them for parent-teacher conferences. And it's this idea that their middle schoolers are almost speaking a different language. Because middle school is very different from elementary, which we've gotten to know very well. And on top of that, the middle school world that they're entering is far different than the middle school world that you or I entered. I think this comic is really great, where Calvin is pouring cereal and Pop says, "Look at the coda ring." Calvin says, "Nah, wow, we can send each other secret messages in code. Haha, now Mom and Dad won't be able to understand us at all." Not that they do anyway. And I feel like this speaks volumes when we look at the needs of our gifted middle school students. Because there are so many things going on. And many times we look at situations and we're like, anything that we do can't seem right. But by understanding these things, we can help create a supportive, positive environment. So one of the first things we need to talk about is self-image. And self-image is really a quintessential middle school thing. And a big part of that is the idea that things have changed dramatically from elementary to middle school. In elementary school, it's not cool to know what's going on. You have that teacher whose favor you're looking at. That teacher is the one person that is a constant adult in that room. And so we have students that are okay doing their best. We have students that are okay doing what they do best. But once we get to middle school, there are now a bunch of different teachers. And the constant changes. It goes from that teacher is going to be kind of the guiding principle to the peer group. And suddenly, being smart is not cool. What can happen is as we get this change, we can have students start to doubt their abilities and doubt what they've been able to do for a long time. I remember distinctly, and this wasn't from middle school, but I remember this moment. It was my senior year of high school, and it was calculus. And for some reason, calculus and we got along. I understood it, it understood me, we were friends. Some of my friends did not have the same success with calculus. And I remember that we came out of a quiz, I did very well on the quiz, and my friends complaining about the quiz and the teacher and how it went. And I remember hiding my test and joining in and being like, "I know, right? That's awful, and that quiz really stunk." When I knew what was going on, and I didn't feel confident sharing, I rocked that quiz. And this changing climate really starts to take hold in middle school. And it's really critical that we have students that are confident in not only who they are, but in what they're able to do. Because as that social climate changes, and we start having a different view of education in school, that can impact the way that our students see themselves. Because once they've been able to receive that feedback, that positive look from the constant, the teacher, and now it's changed to the students, suddenly they look at it and they're like, is this the right course? Should I be trying as hard as I am? Social expectations really take hold here. And we can see students start trying to do things that aren't necessarily who they are. We start seeing students not performing to their best of their abilities. We start seeing students that are okay with just being okay. And so we need to work on not letting our students fall through the cracks, trying to meet social expectations, and making them understand that it's okay to be who they are. Here we have Calvin saying, I don't understand it, Hobbs. The kids teased me when I didn't play baseball. Then they yelled at me when I did play. Then the teacher called me a quitter when I stopped playing. Unless you're a star, you can't please anyone. Hobbs then says, in that case, why not just please yourself? And Calvin says, because Mom won't let me move to Madagascar. And although this is a humorous comic, look at what Calvin experienced. Even without all of the preceding strips, we have a boy who was made fun of for not playing baseball. Then he joins and is made fun of when he does play it. Then when he doesn't feel accepted, he stops and the teacher gives him a hard time about it. At no point was he told it's okay to not want to play baseball or anything like that. And so one of the things that we really need to understand is that we need to make sure that we are providing that support and understanding how little things can hold a big impact. Just looking at this example, the teacher calls him a quitter. That statement right there holds a lot of weight. It's not, you know what? You tried. Baseball's not for you. Is there something else you're interested in? Let's look at that. And what's hard is that little things like that are not said with a great deal of intention. That teacher was probably not sitting there saying, I plan on crushing this child. Yet, calling him a quitter stood out to the point where he acknowledged it. And there's so many little things as teachers and as parents that when we interact with students, little things can mean a great deal. So it's very important that we take these opportunities to help build up students. In an effort to fit in with the values of the new social group, gifted middle school students may opt to hide their intellectual abilities by underperforming academically. One of the biggest things we have students that are gifted. They are gifted, and we don't want them to squander that gift. Especially when we look at the fact that middle school is a great opportunity for them to spread their wings, a great opportunity for them to grow in things that they love. So it's very important that we not only are paying attention to this, but work to build our students up socially. This, throughout the course of this presentation, I've got some excerpts from a book called More Than a Test Score. And basically what the authors did is they went through and surveyed different gifted students of all ages to gain information about different topics. And so these are candid responses from gifted students. And this girl, 13 from Maine, says, yes, I have done things just to go along with the crowd before, because I was tired of being so special, so alone, and I wanted to belong to the big crowd for a while. It never worked very well, though. So part of this, when we look at a situation like this girl from Maine is basically addressing that she would rather fit in than be special. And that's a very sad thing. And so a big part of that when we look at things, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, is finding opportunities to help our middle school students find their crowd. Find people that not only understand them, but value the same sort of things that they do. Calvin addresses this. Calvin says, I've decided we should be cooler than we are. Hobbes says, we're not cool. Calvin says, sure, we're cool, but we're not as cool as we could be. Cool people wear dark glasses. Hobbes says, it's cool to bump into things, and Calvin says, you don't move, you just hang around. One of the biggest things with anything with this, we don't want our middle schoolers to lose who they are. Along with self-image, we also have this idea of perfectionism. And perfectionism is a big thing. So we're talking about essentially two different sides of the coin. You have middle school students that will go into this environment see what the social situation is, and not live up to their expectation, or not live up to their potential. They'll meet the expectations of their social situation. But then you have students, on the other hand, who have such a personal self-image that they need to be perfect, that it is crippling. When we look at perfectionism, one of the big things with this is that we need students to understand that mistakes are okay. Because for many students, middle school is the first place where they might be challenged. And not necessarily because of the curriculum, which hopefully they're being challenged by the curriculum, but because it's an entirely new situation where they're having to juggle 7 different expectations from teachers. They have to weigh out the fact that I've got 2 tests due on Friday, as well as a paper, and there's a project that was just introduced. And they have to learn, how do I balance my time? How do I make this all work? Calvin, struggling, says, everything is so darn hard. I wish I could just take a pill to be perfect, and I wish I could just push a button and have anything I want. Hobson says, the American dream lives on. Calvin says, why should I have to work for everything? It's like saying I don't deserve it. One of the big things that we need to instill in our students is that mistakes are part of the growing process. And for many of these gifted students, everything has come easy. They've not had to struggle. Whenever I work with my students, I'll oftentimes ask them, and what I'll have them do is I'll be like, close your eyes, confidentiality, just want to see show of hands. Raise your hand if you have ever waited until the day before a project is due, and you didn't. And like every hand goes up. And I'm like, raise your hand if you got an A, and all the hands stay up. And so students enter into this environment where they're like, this is easy. And then suddenly, that image is robbed. And they don't think that that's okay. They view it as an issue of, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong. It's like, no, there's only so much time in the day. This comes from more than a test score as well. As a gifted student and something of a perfectionist, I face pressure from myself and others to do better than I have ever before, to always do better. If I do badly on a homework assignment or a quiz, I wonder how this is possible if the class is so easy, and I think that I must be turning stupid. For me, every improvement means almost nothing. It just supports what I already know. But every bad grade makes me think that I am becoming a failure. How else do I respond to this than to overachieve? Seeing something like this breaks my heart. Because not doing well on something is not a sign that a child is dumb, not a sign that a child isn't smart. That's a sign that they're being challenged, that they need to learn from that. Right now in my class, my students, we're reading Hound of the Baskerville by Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes story. So we're talking 19th century literature, not just 19th century literature, 19th century British literature. And I'm having students that I've seen them read Percy Jackson, Harry Potter. I've seen them just blast through these books. And I'm seeing students that are coming to class like, I don't know what I read. And they're like looking at me with this panicked look on their face, and I'm like, good, I'm doing my job. And they're like, how could you say that? And I'm like, because you need to experience that. Because the only way you're going to get better is to struggle, is to have that resistance. Mistakes are what make us grow, make us learn. When you go to the gym to lift weights, you don't lift the 5-pound weights and be like, gotta be buff or something. You challenge yourself. You push yourself. And that's one of the biggest things that we need to help our middle school students understand, is that making a mistake is not a bad thing. Making a mistake is part of being human. Getting the bad grade on the test is not a sign of who you are as a learner. It means that you have an opportunity to grow. And that's really what we want our students to understand, especially at this point. Middle school is a really great learning time because they might struggle here, But I would rather a student not do well on a test in my class than get to high school and have the first C or D or F that they receive be in a high school class and them not know how to bounce back from it. So one of the biggest things that we can do with our gifted middle schoolers is help support them in this. And not just say, you should have studied more. Look at it and say, well, how did we study for this? What time did we allocate for this? What can we do to improve? And work on that. From more than a test score again, ever since I was labeled as gifted, a great deal of stress has been placed on me. This, in turn, has turned me into something of a perfectionist, which is why I hate making mistakes. So, one of the biggest things that we need to take away from this is that every mistake is a learning opportunity. There are these teachable moments for us to work with our students. One of the biggest things that we can do with this as well in middle school. So we've addressed the social interactions, we've addressed the perfectionism. But one of the other things that we need to understand is that these two aspects not only work academically, but affect our students' self-image. They're being inundated with a variety of sources that are telling them different things. Not just about the world, but they're telling them about themselves as well. Things about them that they don't feel good about themselves. So we need to really find ways to have these discussions for the students to find the positive qualities of them. This is something that Calvin is very good at. I sure am great. I'm one of the greatest people who ever lived. How lucky people are to know someone as great as me. I'm great in so many ways. In fact, I'm so great that my greatness is, you're not great. You're the most conceited blowhard I've ever met. Calvin responds with, when you're great, people often mistake candor for bragging. Now, we don't want our students bragging. We don't want them kicking open the door the first day of middle school being like, boom, I'm gifted, deal with it. But we want to help build up the positive qualities of who they are. And oddly enough, one of the best ways to do this is by sharing your own interests with them. And I'm not saying making them take part in things that you like. Obviously share things like that. But part of the way that we can help our middle school students be okay with who they are is by being okay with who we are ourselves. If you've never been in the DLC, in my classroom, I welcome you. Because every Wednesday, our principal does a tour of the school, and you come through the DLC, and it's pretty nerdy. Like, not pretty, it's really nerdy. Like, at least 2 walls are covered in giant superhero cutouts. I've got a bookshelf that is overflowing with pop figures, properly designated by Marvel, DC, Harry Potter, Star Wars. Like, it's pretty overwhelming nerdiness. And this is one of those things that we are able to share our interests with our students. And I found that for when I interact with middle school students, this has been something that makes them comfortable. We read The Outsiders in my class, and so we talk a lot about social acceptance, understanding who we are. It's a natural thing that comes about this. And so we talk a lot about this idea about, who are we? And being okay with who we are. And so we build in that social emotional curriculum with the novel study. But one of the things that we talk about naturally as well is about the idea of growing up. And that whole idea, and it was really funny because I was talking to the kids about, once you grow up, are you ever able to get that back? And I had kids like, apparently you don't have to grow up, and just pointed to my wall. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's true. But more than anything though, by sharing that with kids, it helps them understand that they're okay to like what they like. And once they get to middle school, you have students that are told, it's not okay to like watching cartoons. You need to be watching this or doing this. And I'm not saying that the kids can't enjoy that, but I've seen kids that are sad losing parts of themselves like that. I openly tell my kids, like, I'm binge watching DuckTales this weekend. Because I want them to know that it's okay to be who you are. Several years ago, I had a student that, at the end of the year, a student wrote me a card. And the student really loved toys and action figures. He was my superhero buddy. He was very up to date on the superhero movies. And he wrote me this card and gave me actually a couple action figures from his own collection. For Christmas that year, he actually took one of his like WWE Build-A-Figures and like painted it to be a Mr. Graham action figure. But he wrote me this card thanking me. And what he told me was that, you know, when he came to middle school, he didn't think it was okay to still like toys and action figures. He thought that he had to move past that. But then he comes into my room, and not only are there superheroes on the wall, but I've got all these pop figures, and I'm talking to the kids about that, and that he felt okay with that. That he was okay setting up his action figures on his shelf in his room. Now, I did not do anything directed towards that. I didn't sit down with him and say, hey, it's okay to like superheroes. All I did was share with him something that I liked. And that's something that we all have the power to do. Honestly, every person is nerdy in something. Whether it's sports, music, TV, anything like that. And it's okay. But that's one of the things that we need our gifted students to see. We need them to see that we also value things like that. Because although our students might be so intellectually brilliant, that asynchronous development that we talked about, they're still looking to see, how do I grow socially? Intellectually, I'm there. But what does that mean? Calvin's dad is very clear. Calvin's dad loves bike riding. And so this is a Sunday strip, and actually, just random side note connected to Calvin's thoughts. Bill Watterson is a very fascinating cartoonist because Sunday cartoons follow a very strict structure that allows them to be reorganized, to be able to fit wherever a comic strip might be needed for newspaper space and all that. But Bill Watterson, as he was doing this, as he got further along in his career, basically said, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to use my art to tell the stories that I want to tell. And I'm going to write my Sunday strips the way that I want to write them. And if you don't like that, you won't have Calvin Hobbes. And so, even with someone like Bill Watterson, someone who is very gifted, we see him being okay with his craft. So this strip right here does not follow traditional Sunday comics structure. Yet, he did what he wanted to do because he was confident in who he was. And so that's one of the things that we need our gifted middle school students to understand. So in this strip, we just see Calvin's dad loves riding bikes, and he acknowledges that the secret to really enjoying your profession is to have a hobby that you hate intensely. But personally, I really love the panels with Calvin like flat out laughing at his father. And one of the things with that is, you know, you're not necessarily going to get your gifted middle school student looking at you like, wow, I appreciate that as well, or you're really cool for liking that. Because I can tell you, I have gotten very many strange looks for Tay Tay Tuesdays, where we listen to Taylor Swift music on Tuesdays. But, just like with my comic books and superhero stuff, students look at that, and they understand, oh, I can like that. And I can't tell you how many students have felt comfortable coming up and talking to me about One Direction. And I know more about One Direction than I ever thought I would need to. And I had to hear the rants about Harry Styles and Taylor Swift. But by sharing something like that, it opens up that door. One of the other things that we need to show our middle school students in regard to self-image is that it's all right to make mistakes. And this is one of those things that I've seen with teachers very often, in that it is not okay for the students to see them making a mistake. And oftentimes you'll get this confrontation with teachers teachers and students, where if a teacher doesn't understand gifted students, they view being corrected as this child is disrespectful or anything like that. And we need to show our gifted middle school students that mistakes are okay. And part of that is saying, I make mistakes too. There are often times that I'm giving presentations and I might have something misspelled or a grammatical error or something like that. And I provide, if a student corrects it, I provide an opportunity to have a teachable moment to explain to them, like, shouting, wow, you don't know the difference between lose and loose is not appropriate. But more than anything, I don't sit there and hide it and say, no, you're wrong. I acknowledge, like, wow, yeah, I made a mistake. And we need to show them that that's okay. Because this is an interesting point that oftentimes we will tell our gifted students, it's okay to make mistakes. Except for if I make a mistake, then it's not okay. We need to have these teachable moments with them, and we need to model for them that. I love this comic a lot, where Calvin comes in saying, Mom, hey Mom. His mom off panel says, Calvin, stop yelling across the house. If you want to talk to me, walk over to the living room where I am. Calvin walks over and says, I stepped in dog dew, where's the hose? One of the other things that we have here is that finding opportunities to talk with gifted middle school students allows them to focus on the positive. It's really interesting that, given the current times and things like that, there are a lot of things that students might question. Not just about the world, but themselves. And one of the things that we can provide is we can provide outlets for them to feel comfortable, to see the positive in the world, and to be happy. Even when things are dark. This comic right here comes from a really powerful story that happened, where Calvin finds an injured baby raccoon. And Calvin sees this raccoon and wants to help it. He runs and gets his mom. His parents come get the raccoon, take it back, and basically acknowledge, like, he's not doing well, and we're going to do the best that we can. And in traditional Calvin and Hobbes sense, the watershed doesn't give us necessarily the happy ending. The raccoon passes away. And so Calvin has to come face to face with life and death for the first time, a 6-year-old child. Yet, here we have an opportunity for him to talk through it. Mom says death is as natural as birth, and it's all part of the life cycle. She says we don't really understand it, but there are many things we don't understand. And we just have to come, or do the best we can with the knowledge we have. I guess that makes sense. But don't you go anywhere. Hobbes says don't worry. So not only is this moment such a precious Calvin and Hobbes moment, but we get to see that Calvin's mom had that discussion with him. She talked to him. She helped him through this. And not everything we're going to talk to our gifted middle schoolers are as big as life and death. But there are a lot of things that we can talk them through, to work with them on. And having those discussions is all where it starts. One of the biggest things that we want our gifted middle school students to do is we want them to be comfortable being themselves. Even if that means dancing in the middle of the night to classical music with the speed turned up. Now we're going to be talking about getting involved. And middle school is a very interesting time period because we have our gifted middle school students are given many opportunities to get involved, whether it's with sports, clubs, outside of school sports, music, all of these things. And one of the interesting things is that a recent study of gifted high school graduates, respondents indicated that some of their most positive experiences were in extracurricular activities. Now, although that's regarding high school students, a lot of passion starts in the middle school classroom, or sports, or music, wherever it might be. These extracurriculars provide really great outlets for our gifted middle school students. The problem is that some of our gifted middle school students aren't comfortable getting started. Whether it's that perfectionism of, well, if I'm not the best one, why would I do it? Or anything like that. It could just be they've never experienced it before. I experience this a lot with sports. So at Sunrise, I coach 3 of the 4 boys' sports because why not? I coach boys basketball, I coach co-ed track and field, and I coach boys wrestling. And one of the things that I always talk to my students about is how great this opportunity is with the Festival Sports Program. Because for those of you unfamiliar, in the Paradise Valley School District, the way that the middle school sports program works is it works on the festival system. And what that means is for essentially 4 weeks, 16 practices, any student that comes out, regardless if they are the greatest athlete that ever lived, or if they are not as great, they are part of the team. They practice for those 16 practices, working with the coaches, working with the team, learning the basic skills of the game, working with high school coaches and high school students that come. They get this whole experience. At the end of that 16 practices, they then have the sports festival on a Saturday. Actually, our football and boys football and girls volleyball festival is coming up this Saturday. At the festival, any students that come out get put into a team, and then they have a tournament against the other schools in the district. So depending on how many students come out, you might have multiple teams, but it's a really great opportunity for the students to learn the game and see, maybe I love this. After that, then the all-star team is selected, which they choose the top students, and not always necessarily the best athletes, but the students that might work the best with others, might be leaders, might serve specific roles and things like that. And those students then practice some more and compete against the other schools. But I always talk to my students about this opportunity because it gives them a chance to learn something and realize that there are multiple people that have never played this game before in a competitive setting. And I've had multiple students that have gone out for basketball, never playing club, never really thinking about it, that have then gone on to make all-stars because they've worked hard and they've learned it and they're like, I love this. I've had students that have come out for wrestling and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do wrestling, but you're here and I kind of trust you, so okay, we'll do this, and my parents said I have to. And they come out and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm Hulk Hogan. I'm like, put the chair down. But you're doing a great job. Part of this is encouraging you to get engaged and get involved with things and finding those things. And this is where when we talked about the students having the poor self-image and having those opportunities where the social interactions are not helping them, a big part of that is finding that group they identify with. And it doesn't have to be sports. It can be band, it can be drama, it can be robotics, it can be art, it can be all of these things. But the key is that these students, by interacting, find opportunities to find things that they love. When we look at this, having students go outside their comfort zone can lead to new experiences. Calvin's dad sees Calvin and Hobbes playing checkers. Are you just going to sit inside all day? You should go play outside and get some fresh air. Calvin and Hobbes put on their outdoor gear to get outside and they go outside and play checkers. The big thing with this, though, is that we want our students to have these experiences. Because in those experiences, they determine, yes, I like this, or no, I don't. And if they don't like it, that is perfectly fine. If a student comes out for basketball and they're like, oh, no, why would you tell me to do this? I'm not going to be like, you've hurt my feelings deeply, sir. Like, no, that's fine. You tried it. You don't have to do it next year. But part of it is encouraging that so that they have that understanding. One of the things that we need to be careful, though, is that we need our kids to believe that we know that they can be successful. In this comic here, Calvin throws the ball up, he's trying to track it, he ends up chasing it around, and completely misses it. His dad said, I wouldn't be worried about this if he was a better student. Now, as a punchline for a comic strip, that's fantastic. Really great setup, we know Calvin, we know his dad, it's incredibly funny. But for the student that hears that right there, it's hard. Because what he is saying is, I don't believe that my son can be successful. And that is one of the biggest things that we need to work with our students on. One of the things that we see here is research has shown that children can infer their teachers' beliefs about their ability to be successful. And when students are able to infer that, they meet the high expectations, the low expectations. And that goes the same for at home. Now, when we look at situations like this, we need to understand that that does not mean that you are sitting there telling your child, or the teacher is telling their child, wow, I expect you to be a failure. But little things can hold a big impact. During our Outsiders unit, when we're talking, I'll talk to my students, and we talk very openly about being gifted. And it's one of those things that the DLC, they're all gifted, and we talk about our giftedness and what it means. And the Outsiders provides a really great opportunity, especially having a year with me. We read it at the end of the year, so it really provides a great outlet for a night. And so we talk about being gifted and the expectations that come with being gifted. And it's really interesting talking with the kids. And some of the things that they bring forward. Little statements that might be said as a joke, hurt a lot. I've had students that have addressed, it hurts because I'll go to do something that I've never done before. And my family will joke and say, I thought you were gifted. Now, a statement like that, without knowing the parents or anything like that, I would not imagine is said out of malice. But saying it as a joke stings. Because it's saying, you know what, our expectation was here and you didn't meet it. Ouch. And for gifted students, that's hard. Because we might say things that we don't even think about. But that is the sort of thing, especially at the middle school level, when they are taking in all of the world around them to form who they are, who they're going to be. They take in all these little comments. And when they hear things like that, maybe I'm not good enough. When we look at this, teacher communication of their worth to individual students had an impact on self-confidence. In all these situations, we have opportunities to empower our students or to hold them back. And a big part of that is being direct with what we feel. Addressing with them, you are brilliant. Like, you can do this. I had a student that she highly doubted herself academically. For whatever reason, she did not think that she was as good as the other students. Every assignment that she would turn in was basically turned in with like an apology. Taking the Civil War test at the end of our unit, and I go overboard with the Civil War. Like, I spent 2 quarters basically on it. End of the quarter Civil War test, she's one of like 3 students that gets 100% on it. I called her over. I showed her the test. I basically told her, I don't want to hear you doubting yourself again. She was super ecstatic about that. But I had to tell her, no, do not sit there and put yourself below anyone else in this classroom. She's a student that would not turn in assignments. And so her grade might not have reflected her ability, but she was just as brilliant. And so she was nervous about not meeting those expectations. So we need to find those opportunities to celebrate those victories. Tell our students how much we value them. Point out the positive things that they're doing. That's not saying never point out feedback and say, this is how we can improve. But we need to celebrate victories. One of the other things with our getting involved, though, is that this can have an impact on parents. Because gifted students can have very packed schedules. And this can be very overwhelming for the parents as well. If we look at things, we have, think about a child that's involved with a middle school day. They go to school at 7:40, they go to festival sports, they get out at 4. Then they've got Taekwondo at 6. You've picked them up, but Taekwondo is on the other side of town. You have to get them to the other side of town. Taekwondo is an hour and a half. You're having to either wait there or drive somewhere else to go do that. And this is done 3 or 4 times a day. So it can be overwhelming. And one of the things that I want you to understand as well is that it's okay for you to feel overwhelmed and to acknowledge, like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. Part of that is that we need to make sure that we have downtime. Because having downtime is not a bad thing. Because downtime in research has shown that it can increase productivity and creativity. So we need to create opportunities for downtime. If that means scheduling downtime, do it. And that sounds really counterintuitive to be like, this is scheduled, unstructured fun time. But you need to have those breaks in there. Not just with academics and all the other things, but our gifted middle schoolers, they need time to slow down. Consistently, my homework over 3-day weekends or holidays is I want them to play a video game or binge watch a show or read a non-academic book or go play a sport or make something creative or just go for a walk. Because I want them to have those experiences to just breathe. Because I know personally, I have to take breaks. I have to sit back and say, you know what? I'm going to play Nintendo for a little bit. Because I need that. And our middle schoolers need that. If we can see here Calvin and Hobbes. Hobbes is saying, you know what I like about summer days? They're just made for doing things. Even if it's nothing. Calvin says especially if it's nothing. We need to build in these opportunities for our students just to chill. Because that's going to help them. Now, obviously, if they have put off the giant research paper until Thursday night and it's due Friday, probably not the time to say, let's go for a walk in the park. But it's perfectly okay to tell them, you know what, take a break. This weekend, let's go do something. Your homework will be there. And part of that is also shutting off smartphones and things like that. And I'm not going to get into a whole detail about smartphone usage on that, but a lot of it is just shut your mind off. Don't check your email. And work with that. Because although we want our students to be active and busy and all that, part of being a kid is just sitting down and being okay doing nothing. And part of what we need to tell them is, that's okay. Now, obviously, flip side, if they are doing nothing but nothing, then we need to kind of pump the brakes on that. But that leads into support. We need to establish an environment of trust, so our gifted middle schoolers will reach out to us when they need help. We can see here, Calvin is on the phone. He says, "Hi, Dad, it's me, Calvin. How's work going?" Pretty day out, isn't it? Yep. Are you bringing me home any presents tonight? No? Well, just thought I'd ask. Listen, I suppose you're wondering why I called, as the water is up to the top of the door, and he's on the stepladder. One of the biggest things that I've noticed working with middle school students and gifted middle school students is that many times they don't want to ask for help. For whatever reason. They will be sitting there, and I will see the stress on their face, and I will ask them time and time again if they need help, and they're like, no, I'm fine. And then the next day, I get the frantic email or whatever it might be. Part of what we can do is establish this environment with our students, that it's okay to ask for help. And that's what we want. And one of the things that I hope is that you see how all of these things are building on each other. Establishing and helping them develop their self-image helps them realize it's okay to make mistakes, which also helps them realize that asking for help is not a bad thing. I have many students that come to me like at the last minute and they're like, "Mr. Graham, things fell apart with this project." And like, if you would have asked me like the 3 days ago. We could have saved like what this was. But you came to me now. So let's address how to fix this and go from there. We want them to be comfortable talking with us. And one of the great things is you have known your gifted middle schooler for 11 to 13 years. So hopefully they're comfortable talking to you. And one of the things that can come down to is working with them on how to ask for help. I have students that for whatever reason, they don't want to come across like they don't know things when interacting with their teachers. They don't want to ask me because they think it'll make them look less smart or something like that. So they don't want to have that face-to-face conversation. Even if mom or dad has emailed me and said, hey, my child is freaking out. And I go, okay, well, let me talk to them. And I talk to them like, everything is fine. As they're like gritting their teeth and like, One of the things that you can do to help them with that is work with them on their communication. And if that means the two of you sitting down and writing an email together, saying, let's send this from your email to your teacher. What do we want to say? Working through that with them. That's going to help develop that advocacy. And it's also going to help develop the rapport that the two of you have together. Because that's also going to tell them that my parents are okay that I need help. And they're going to help me through that. Because ultimately, one of the things that we want with our middle school students is we want them to be able to advocate for themselves. Middle school is an interesting time because with 7 different teachers, the students are in there. They know what's going on. You don't. And so a lot of the communication that middle school teachers want, they want it to funnel from the classroom to the student, to you. And as much as teachers love interacting with parents, we want our students to be able to develop that advocacy skill. Because once they get to high school or college, we want them to have their voice developed. One of the things that we see here as well is that social connection emerged as a significant moderator in lessening the effects of maladaptive perfectionism on concurrent hopelessness. One practical implication of these findings is that maladaptively perfectionistic honor students have less of a social safety net than their adaptively perfectionistic peers, and therefore might benefit from interventions directed toward building on enhancing their schools or their social safety net. In other words, having friends and positive interactions helps students deal with the stress that they're dealing with. Now, this was done at the college level, but the same thing applies at the middle school level. I've seen so many students come into my classroom that when they're by themselves, you just see this stress take on. Every project is a chore. Every presentation in front of the class has tears welling in the eyes. But once they start establishing those social connections and that group of friends, that student is completely different in that classroom. They're laughing, they're having fun, and they've developed these skills because they have that social net. We can see here in this Sunday comic, Calvin says, I can't sleep. I think nighttime is dark so you can imagine your fears with less distraction. At nighttime, the world always seems so big and scary, and I always seem so small. I wish I could fall asleep so it would be morning. Ugh. Look at Hobbs, he's asleep. He sure looks funny when he sleeps. Tigers close their eyes so tight. I wonder what he's dreaming about. Good old Hobbs, what a friend. Things are never quite as scary when you've got a best friend. One of the big things that we want to do with our middle school students is we want to develop the social aspect with them. And some students are not going to have these giant social nets. Some students might have 1 or 2 friends. But one of the other things that we have to understand is that parents also are part of that. If your middle school student is comfortable talking to you, you can help them through that. And that builds along with, it's okay to make mistakes. I'm here to support you. I'm going to build you up, not tear you down. For more than a test score, a girl from California says, I do feel hopeful about the future because I have a lot of support in my life. Also, I always do everything to the best of my ability. And I think that quality is going to help me. My parents support me a lot, and that motivates me to have positive ways of thinking about my life. I have hope because I believe in myself and others believe in me. Hope is such an interesting thing when we look at middle school, because middle schoolers are facing so many different challenges. I mentioned that I coach track, and I had a student that really brilliant student, like fantastic student. She had so many brilliant ideas, and she's one of those students that could legitimately go into any field, and I would be 100% confident that she's going to revolutionize that field. So I talked to the student, and I felt that track would be a really great opportunity for her. So I talked to the student, and I encouraged her, and I talked to her parents about it, and I was like, I think it would be really good for her. Her parents were like, yes, do it. And so I talked to the student, and she agreed to do track. I was like, oh my gosh, like, she agreed to do track. Awesome. So she did track, and she was running the 800 meters, which is 2 laps around the track. And we got to the practice track meet. And so we competed against one other school. And at this meet, it's really just so the students get time and understand how it goes. But it's the first time these students are running and competing against students from another school in front of a crowd. So I'm walking with the student up to the start line, and because they called the 800, and she's walking head down, and she basically she says, what if I lose by a lot? Now, it wasn't just what if I lose. It was, what if I lose by a lot? So she had already conceded that she was going to lose this race, and her fear was, by how much? And I told her, and so the students, they wear stickers on their shirts that have their name, the event that they're running, and the time that they're running. And I said, I don't care what you finish. Track is not about that. All I care about is that you try your best. And if you can improve the time that you ran, the best time that you've run, that's huge. That's all I care about. So she ran the 800. She came in last. She walks off the track, and she is not excited or anything like that. Head down, she's lost. And I asked her, I was like, did you improve your time? That's what we talked about. And she had shaved like a minute off of her time or some crazy amount like that. I was like, oh my gosh, are you serious? That is huge. And so I was so happy that a high schooler that had been helping the distance runners, she ran cross country for Horizon, I believe. So the student was helping the students at the track meet. And she walked by and heard that, and she like stopped, and she was like, you shaved a minute off your time? That is huge. And it was this really fantastic opportunity to celebrate and build up this student. A student who, her worst fear had come true, had an opportunity to be celebrated. After the track meet, I was walking in my car, and she, like the students were leaving, her family was walking, and she came running up. She said, thank you, and ran back. But in that moment, her worst moment was made positive because of the people around her. So that's one of the things that we need to make sure that we do. We need to make sure that we're building up our students. Now, on the flip side, and this is going to sound very weird coming off of that story, but as hard as it can be, sometimes we have to let our middle school students struggle a little bit. Because as much as we want to build them up, part of providing support for them is helping them to build themselves up. And what I mean by this, I'm not saying let your students flounder and all of that, but oftentimes, especially given the nature of elementary school, we are very quick to jump in and address the problem, not develop that moment to discuss with our students, well, how do we address this with the teacher? Well, if you don't understand the assignment, what are the avenues to find it? It's very quick. I'm going to send the teacher an email, and we send the email. But we need to make sure that we are giving our students and empowering them as well. Calvin comes in and says, hey, Mom, when's lunch? His mom says, later, Calvin, I'm busy. Calvin shrieks, but I'm hungry now. I want to eat. A map to the refrigerator. Hilarious. Now, we need to make sure that we intervene if the problem needs it. For instance, Calvin is hammering nails into the coffee table. His mom runs in saying, Calvin, what are you doing to the coffee table? Calvin asks, is this some sort of trick question or what? There are times that we need to intervene very quickly. But there are other times that we need to let our students have that opportunity to understand that it's okay to make the mistakes, to experience what it's like. When I start my school year with my students, the first project, I give them the parameters of the project and then I kind of step back. And I even tell them up front that I'm stepping back and letting them do what they're going to do. Because middle school students tend to not listen when I say, guys, I've done this for 7 years and I know how this is going to turn out. They say, we're going to be different. And I say, okay. And I let them experience some of the struggles of not listening first. Now, I'm there the entire time. I'm not letting them play with fire or anything like that, but I'm giving them the opportunity to experience, to work on that and develop that. If there's any major problems, horrific group dynamics where fighting is happening or anything like that, I'm right there. But we need to give our students that opportunity to experience that. And so that's one of the big things that we need to understand. Yes, we need to develop and build up our students, but at the same time, sometimes helping to build them up means stepping back and giving them the map to the refrigerator. Ultimately, though, the best thing that we can do for our kids is to let them know that we are there for them. This is a comment that came at the end of a story arc where, in very much Calvin and Hobbes' structure, it doesn't end with a happy ending. The bully takes Calvin's toy truck, I think it was, and Calvin tries to get it back and fails. And Calvin acknowledges to Hobbes, you know, sometimes the world seems like a pretty neat place. And Hobbes says that's why animals are so soft and hush. Now, one of the things that I loved about this comic, Bill Watterson, when he does this, he's very much an artist in the way that he crafts his panels. I mean, go buy a Calvin and Hobbes book, look at his artwork, and compare that to a lot of other comics, and you'll see the quality of what he does. But he's very deliberate in the way that he sets this up. That last panel just focuses on Calvin, Hobbes, and the tree, leaving the rest of the world blank. And it's not because he's lazy. It's not like he was on a time crunch. He was like, I don't have time to draw anything, so we're going to leave it blank. I really feel that there's a deliberate point in there just for us to focus that for Calvin, he just needed that support and nothing else matters. And that's what we can provide for our students. The final point that I want to address is in regard to worldview. And one of the interesting things about middle school and gifted middle school students is that at this age, they're establishing their view of the world. They're establishing who they are going to be. They're establishing how they are going to view the world and how they're going to interact in it. And yes, those qualities are going to be reinforced in high school, but this is a definite place where you start to see some understanding of this is who I am and this is how it works. One of the big things that we need to understand is that experiences allow students to develop their worldview. Experiencing things allows them to gain understanding. When we look at a situation like struggling and making mistakes, through that struggle, they understand. This is how it works. It's always fascinating because we always, in the DLC, we have the 8th graders come and talk to the 7th graders and give them advice, and they're like, we've done this. And almost always they're like, oh yeah, don't procrastinate. Don't do that. They're going to tell you not to. Don't do it. And the 7th graders go, okay, challenge accepted. And they're going to experience oh my gosh, they were right. But they had to experience it. They have to develop that world view. And middle school is filled with opportunities for them. One of the things that we need to understand with this as well is that they are not only learning who they are learning what the world means, how the world interacts, and what their place is going to be in that. Calvin's mom says, Calvin, will you gather the trash, please? Calvin says, why should I? What do I get in return? Calvin's mom says, well, we will feed, clothe, shelter, and educate you throughout your entire youth. Calvin says, I really hate having things put in perspective. Our gifted middle school students have had a certain way that they have understood the world. And it's an opportunity in middle school for them to grow that perspective. With that, part of that involves talking about things like current events. And that allows students to consider the world around them. It's really interesting, and when we talk about anything, and being a social studies teacher, I have a lot of opportunities to talk about history with the students. And we spend a great deal of time understanding, well, what perspectives are present here? And understanding you do not have to agree with a perspective to understand what their argument is. You can think it's a ridiculous argument, but you need to understand it. And one of the powerful things is that this gives you an opportunity to talk with your middle schooler about big events, about big things happening. Question with them. Explain what you believe and why. In my classroom, when we're talking about history, so much of what we're talking about is, well, let's look at these perspectives. When we study World War I, the majority of our World War I unit is done through a German perspective, to understand the choices that these soldiers were making, to understand the reasoning behind the war starting and all of that. And in doing that, it strengthens their view and what they believe about it. As parents, you have a very powerful opportunity to have these discussions with them. From More Than a Test Score, a boy from Connecticut notes, I sit down with my mom and watch the news. She'll discuss things with me that I don't understand. She explains things very well, in my opinion. This is a really great opportunity to have these discussions with your students. Calvin asks his dad, Dad, how do soldiers killing each other solve the world's problems? His dad has a bead question, and Calvin walks away saying, I think grown-ups just act like they know what they're doing. One of the things that we have with this is that you have an opportunity to not only talk with your students, but you have an opportunity to help build them up and build up their worldview. To help them understand multiple sides of an issue. To help them look at current events and sort their way through it. There's so much stuff coming at them. This is a really powerful opportunity for you to have that discussion with them, because honestly, there's a lot of scary things going on. But in talking with them, you can help them see positive things. You can help them sort through it. This right here was the final Calvin and Hobbes comic strip published. And basically, Calvin and Hobbes are outside like they always are. And one of the greatest things about Calvin is Calvin loves being in nature. He loves exploring. He loves experiencing things. That's one of the big things with our middle school students. We want them to have those opportunities. Calvin says, wow, it really snowed last night. Isn't it wonderful? Hobbes says, everything familiar has disappeared. The world looks brand new. A new year, fresh, clean start. Hobbes says, it's like having a big white sheet of paper to draw on. Calvin says, a day full of possibilities. It's a magical world, Hobbes, old buddy. Let's go explore. With our middle school students, we have a great opportunity. With middle school, we have an opportunity to help build them up and let them explore the world around them. By introducing them to various things, talking to them, just being a support in their life, we can really build them up in a way that they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. I feel like this comic really captures the whole spirit of middle school, because it can be a trying place. But one of the things that we want the students to see is that, you know what, tough things will happen. But it's a really great place. It's magical. It's a really great opportunity for them to explore. So, that is all I have for today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And after questions or anything, if you also have questions about the DL